He did not marry her out of love. He married her because she had been taught to obey him. She was 23. He was an old man. The house where this story began had been quiet for much longer than people realized. It was not the quiet of peace or comfort, but the quiet of routine repeated so often that sound itself had learned to stay away. The walls were thick, built to last longer than the lives inside them. The ceilings were high, not for beauty but for authority. Corridors stretched farther than necessary, carrying footsteps and then letting them fade slowly, as if even echoes were reluctant to leave. When he was younger, the house felt like proof. Proof that he had succeeded where others had failed. Proof that his name would remain carved into land and memory. Every room had once felt earned. Every door opened had meant something. Now as age settled into his body, the same house felt different. Too large, too patient, as if it were waiting for him to become unnecessary. Once the house had belonged to two people. He and his wife had married when they were young, enough to believe time would always move forward and never circle back. They did not marry for love. Love was unreliable, emotional, dangerous. They married because it made sense. Their families approved. Their money aligned. Their futures looked clean and predictable. Over time, something like companionship grew. Not passion, not romance, but familiarity. Shared meals, shared silences, shared irritation that never crossed into hatred. Children never came. At first, the absence felt temporary. Doctors were consulted. Advice was given. Remedies were tried. Years passed. Conversations shortened. Hope learned to speak quietly. Eventually, the subject stopped appearing altogether. Like a room whose door was closed and never opened again. They adjusted without admitting they had adjusted. When illness took his wife, it arrived politely. There was no collapse, no drama. Just fatigue that stayed too long. Weakness that did not leave. Tasks that slowly became impossible. He responded the way he had always responded to problems. He spent money. Doctors arrived from distant cities. Medicines filled cabinets. Promises were made carefully, as if careful words could change outcomes. None of it mattered. She grew thinner inside the bed they had shared for decades. Her voice softened. Her movements slowed. He slept beside her even when sleep no longer came easily. When she died, it was early morning. Light crept into the room without hesitation. He was holding her hand when her breathing stopped. There were no last words, no confession, no forgiveness, just the sudden realization that something warm had become something empty. After the burial, people came with rehearsed grief. They spoke softly. They praised his composure. They told him he was strong. They suggested remarriage as if loneliness were a mechanical issue that could be fixed by replacement. He listened, he nodded. He refused. Loneliness did not frighten him. Disorder did. When everyone left, the house did not feel empty. It felt rearranged without permission. He stopped entering certain rooms. He ate meals without sitting at the table. He slept on one side of the bed and never questioned when it became permanent. Silence settled in layers, growing heavier with time. The slave family had lived on the property long before his wife became ill. The father was strong, quiet, and efficient. He did not ask questions. He anticipated needs. His wife moved through the house with eyes lowered and voice controlled. She knew where she was allowed to exist and where she was not. They lived in quarters behind the main house, close enough to serve, far enough to remain unseen. Their daughter was born during the later years of his wife's life. The sound of the baby reached the main house faintly, carried by wind and distance. At first it irritated him. It reminded him that life continued beyond his control. Over time, the sound blended into the background, no more significant than birds or distant carts. He saw the girl clearly for the first time years later. She stood near the edge of the garden, holding her mother's clothing, staring at him with open curiosity. Children had not yet learned fear. They looked directly. The openness unsettled him. He turned away and walked inside. From then on, she existed only in fragments. A small figure crossing the yard, a quiet presence carrying laundry, a shadow near doorways not meant for her. She learned early without being told which paths were allowed, which doors were forbidden, which expressions brought punishment, and which ensured survival. Her parents taught her carefully. Not with cruelty, but with urgency. Fear was instruction. Fear was protection. As she grew, her movements changed. She stopped running, stopped laughing loudly, stopped asking unnecessary questions. By the time she was old enough to help inside the main house, control had already shaped her body and mind. She cleaned. She carried. She watched. The master noticed her only as function. Objects were where they belonged. Mistakes corrected themselves. The house ran smoothly. That was enough. After his wife's death, his routine slowed. Age began collecting payment. His knees ached in the mornings. His back stiffened after sitting too long. His hands trembled when he wrote. He disliked these changes and pretended they were temporary. The girl adjusted without instruction. A chair placed closer, tea arriving at the right moment, a presence nearby without intrusion. There was no pity in her actions, only attention. That mattered to him. Loneliness does not always arrive as pain. Sometimes it arrives as habit. He grew accustomed to her presence practically, not emotionally. She was there, predictable, reliable. Years passed. The house aged. Paint dulled. Furniture softened. Rooms fell into disuse. The slave family remained. The girl changed. Her posture straightened. Her face settled into balance. Beauty appeared whether she wanted it to or not. Others noticed first. Lingering glances. Whispered comments. Awkward silences. He noticed irritation before desire. Possession before longing. When she turned 23, the decision did not arrive suddenly. It formed slowly. Justified quietly. He was alone. She was familiar. She belonged to the house. Marriage, he told himself, was order, structure, protection. He did not call it desire. He did not call it ownership. The proposal was not made to her first. It was spoken to her father in a tone that assumed agreement. The father listened. His jaw tightened. His eyes lowered. He nodded. Resistance was a language he had never been allowed to learn. She was informed afterward. She did not cry. She did not protest. She lowered her eyes. Obedience answered for her. And the house, which had learned silence long ago, remained silent. The marriage changed nothing at first. That was what made it dangerous. The same doors opened at the same hours. The same meals were prepared. The same corridors carried footsteps that belonged only to him. From the outside, the house looked unchanged, as if the decision had been absorbed by the walls without resistance. Inside, however, something had shifted. The girl no longer moved through the house as she once had. Her steps were slower, more careful, as if the floor itself had become uncertain beneath her feet. She wore different clothes now. Heavier, more restrictive, chosen for her rather than by her. The fabric marked her new position, but it did not protect her from what that position required. She slept in his room now. The bed that had once held his wife and the long absence after her death was no longer empty. It was occupied again, but not filled. Presence is not the same as warmth. He noticed this difference immediately, though he did not name it. He had never been good at naming things that made him uncomfortable. On the first night, she did not speak. On the second, neither did he. By the third, silence had established itself as routine. He approached marriage the way he approached everything else. As structure, as control, as something to be managed rather than felt. He did not ask her what she wanted. Wanting had never been relevant in the lives of people like her. He told himself she was fortunate. She had a roof, security, a future that did not depend on exhaustion and obedience alone. He ignored the fact that obedience had already defined her entire existence. She learned quickly how to exist, as his wife, the same way she had learned to exist as a servant. By watching, by listening, by anticipating, she learned which moods required silence and which demanded response. She learned how to move through the bedroom without disturbing him, how to breathe quietly, how to fold herself smaller, even when space was available. At night, she lay still. He mistook this stillness for acceptance. Age had softened his body but hardened his expectations. He disliked disorder. He disliked unpredictability. He disliked anything that reminded him that time had reduced him from what he once was. When she hesitated, when her hands trembled, when her eyes avoided his, irritation surfaced quickly. He corrected her, not with violence at first, with words, with tone, with reminders of where she came from and what she owed. Cruelty does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives as instruction repeated too often, as correction delivered without patience, as discipline justified as care. The house adapted again. Servants avoided her gaze now. Whispers followed her through corridors. The slave family moved with even more caution than before. Her father did not look at her directly anymore. He understood what the marriage meant, even if he could not speak it. Her mother's face grew tighter, her movements more rigid. There was guilt there, but guilt is useless when survival is at stake. The master noticed the change in the household and approved of it. Order had been restored, boundaries reinforced. He began asserting himself in small ways. Meals served exactly when he demanded. Rooms kept at specific temperatures. Lights extinguished at precise hours. When she failed to meet expectations, his displeasure filled the space between them. He withheld words, withheld acknowledgement. Silence became punishment, and she learned to fear it more than anger. She tried harder. She woke earlier. She moved faster. She spoke less. Her body began to carry the weight of constant vigilance. Shoulders tight, breath shallow, sleep restless. She rarely dreamt. Dreams require safety. Visitors came occasionally, and with them came judgment disguised as curiosity. Eyes lingered too long. Questions arrived wrapped in politeness. Why had she agreed? How did she manage? Did she not feel ashamed? Each question pulled her further away from him. He noticed this distance and resented it. In his mind, he had given her everything. Position, protection, his name. Gratitude was expected, not withdrawal. When she grew quieter around him after such encounters, he interpreted it as ingratitude. His correction grew harsher. He reminded her of her place, of her origins, of the life she would have lived without him. He told himself this was honesty. The age difference between them widened with every passing day. His body slowed while hers remained young. The contrast irritated him. Her energy, her strength, her ability to endure made him feel weak. Weakness was unacceptable. He demanded more from her, more attention, more submission, more proof that she belonged to him. Affection never entered the equation. Desire, when it surfaced, was cold and transactional. It took without giving, expected without offering. She endured. That was what she had been trained to do. The house began to feel heavier to her. The walls closer, the ceilings lower, the corridors longer than necessary. She spent hours staring out of windows, watching life continue beyond property lines she could not cross. Her body began to change. At first she ignored it. Fatigue lingered longer than usual. Nausea arrived in the mornings. Dizziness followed simple movements. She said nothing until she could no longer hide it. When it was confirmed, there was no joy. He reacted with satisfaction, not happiness. A child meant permanence, legacy, proof that time had not entirely defeated him. He did not ask how she felt. He did not consider the strain on her body or mind. Pregnancy became another expectation. She was required to endure it quietly. Pain was inconvenient. Fear was unnecessary. Weakness was unacceptable. When her body struggled, he accused her of exaggeration. When she needed rest, he accused her of laziness. The servants noticed her suffering and looked away. No one intervened. The house absorbed it all. As her body grew heavier, her world grew smaller. Movement became difficult. Sleep became shallow. Fear settled into her chest like something permanent. She began to understand that survival was no longer guaranteed. He noticed her fear and despised it. Fear reminded him of mortality, of loss, of things he could not control. He responded the only way he knew how, with cruelty disguised as authority. By the time her labor began, the house had already decided the outcome. Pain filled the room where silence had once lived. Hours stretched without mercy. Her cries echoed through corridors that had heard too much already. He stood nearby, irritated by the noise, impatient for resolution. When it was over, she was gone. The child lived. The house returned to silence. And for the first time, silence did not feel obedient. The house learned how to live without her faster than anyone expected. That was the cruelest part. On the morning after her death, servants moved through the corridors, with the same routines they had practiced for years. Floors were swept. Curtains were drawn back. Food was prepared at the same hours. The world outside the walls continued without hesitation, and inside the house adjusted itself around the absence as if absence had always been part of its design. The old man woke late that day, not because he had slept deeply, but because waking required effort now. His body felt heavier not with grief, but with something dull and resistant, as if time itself had settled into his bones overnight. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that waits. He turned his head toward the other side of the bed out of habit, then stopped himself. There was nothing to see there. No movement, no warmth, no breath. He stared at the empty space longer than necessary, then pushed himself upright with irritation, angry at his own pause. Weakness, he told himself. He dressed without assistance, refused help when it was offered. Authority mattered more now than ever. The servants watched him carefully, as if unsure which version of him would emerge. He noticed their caution and disliked it. Fear should be consistent, not uncertain. Downstairs the child cried. The sound cut through the house in sharp, uneven bursts. It was not a gentle sound. It demanded response. He stood still for a moment, listening, jaw tight. This was new. He had not planned for noise to follow death so quickly. He ordered the wet nurse to be summoned. Instructions were given with precision. He wanted efficiency, not sympathy. Sympathy complicated things. When the child was brought into the room later that day, wrapped tightly and sleeping again, he examined it with the same detached attention he once gave ledgers and documents. He noted the size, the skin, the faint movements beneath closed eyes. The child looked fragile, temporary. A strange relief settled in his chest. It lived. That fact mattered more than how it had arrived. People would talk. They always did. But proof quieted talk. Proof made questions irrelevant. A living child meant continuation, legacy, evidence that his life had not narrowed into uselessness. He did not look at the child and think of her. Not consciously. He dismissed the servants and stood alone with the cradle longer than necessary. His reflection in the glass nearby startled him. He looked older than he remembered, thinner, less fixed. He straightened instinctively, as if posture could correct what time had already decided. He touched the cradle once, lightly, then withdrew his hand. Possession did not require tenderness. The days that followed blurred together. The house found a rhythm that did not include grief, but acknowledged disruption. The slave family moved differently. Now quieter, slower, their daughter's absence hung over them like a shared injury they were not allowed to mention. He noticed their restraint. It irritated him. He reminded them of their place through tone rather than punishment, through implication rather than force. He did not need cruelty now. He needed order. The child became the center of a quiet rearrangement. Rooms were repurposed, schedules adjusted, servants reassigned. Everything was handled practically, as if a transaction had occurred, rather than a death. At night, however, practicality abandoned him. Sleep came unevenly. He woke often, sometimes without knowing why. The house sounded different after dark, louder in some ways, softer in others. He told himself it was age making him sensitive, but certain sounds carried memory whether he wanted them to or not. A chair creaking, fabric shifting, breath where there should be none. He corrected himself each time. Memory was indulgence. Weeks passed. The child gained weight. Its cries changed. It began to recognize faces. He watched these developments from a distance, receiving reports rather than participating. Distance was safer. Distance preserved authority. People began to comment on resemblance. He allowed it. It pleased him in a way he did not admit. Proof again, confirmation. When people saw the child and saw him, the story became simpler. Ownership clarified things. Still, there were moments when unease crept in. Sometimes he caught servants, looking at the child with expressions that unsettled him. Not affection, not joy, something closer to reverence mixed with fear, as if the child represented something unfinished rather than something new. He dismissed this as imagination. As months passed, age tightened its grip. His hands shook more frequently. His steps shortened. His patience thinned. He compensated by speaking less and expecting more. Silence became his preferred tool. Silence forced obedience. The slave family endured. They had always endured. Their grief did not vanish. It compressed, turned inward. Their eyes dulled. Their movements became mechanical. He noticed this and approved. Emotion was inefficient. Yet something in the house resisted efficiency now. Certain rooms felt wrong. The corridor near the back stairs held a heaviness he avoided without acknowledging. He changed his routes, altered routines, told himself it was convenience. It was avoidance. The child grew into early awareness, watched more than it spoke, observed interactions with unsettling stillness. He noticed this and found it irritating. Children should be loud or foolish, not attentive. Once, when he entered the room unexpectedly, the child stared at him without expression. No fear, no curiosity, just presence. He held the gaze too long, then turned away with irritation. Defiance came in many forms. Time continued its slow work. The house aged with him. Paint peeled, wood warped. Repairs were made without care. Everything felt provisional now, as if permanence had already been revoked. He stopped inviting guests. Public appearances exhausted him. Questions lingered behind politeness. He disliked the way people looked at him now, as if searching for something beneath his words. He had always controlled narratives. Now narratives felt unstable. At night, thoughts returned uninvited. Not images at first, sensations, pressure in the chest, restlessness, anger without clear target. He blamed the servants, the house, age, anything except himself. Then the images came, her hands gripping the sheets, her breath uneven, the way her eyes searched his face during labor. He pushed these away violently, sitting upright, heart pounding. He reminded himself that weakness killed people. That endurance was rare, that he had done nothing unusual. Repetition did not erase the images, but it dulled them. Years passed. The child grew older, quieter, observant. She asked few questions, and when she did, they were careful, as if she had learned early which things were dangerous to wonder about. He preferred this, but one evening, as shadows stretched, long across the room, and the house settled into its nightly stillness, the child asked where her mother was. The question was spoken without emotion. It struck him harder than any accusation could have. He reacted sharply, too sharply. His voice rose. The servants froze. He told the child not to ask useless questions, told her the past was finished, told her to be grateful for what remained. The child listened, then nodded, and said nothing. That silence unsettled him more than tears would have. That night, sleep did not come at all. He lay awake, listening to the house breathe around him. For the first time, the silence felt observant, not empty, not obedient, judging, and somewhere beneath that judgment, something else waited. Not yet regret, but its shape had begun to form. Time did not move forward for him. It closed in. The years after the child's question did not announce themselves with events. They arrived as erosion. Days folded into one another without distinction. Morning light felt harsher. Evenings felt heavier. The house aged the way a body does. Not dramatically, but persistently, in small failures that accumulated. He began waking before dawn, not because he was rested, but because sleep no longer trusted him. His eyes opened into darkness, and darkness no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. He lay still, listening to the house, cataloguing sounds the way he once catalogued: property, pipes, wood, breath. Somewhere far down the corridor, the child's quiet movements as she turned in her sleep. He did not rise to check on her. He told himself distance was discipline, but distance began to feel like cowardice. During the day, he filled his hours with routines that once gave him authority: paperwork, inventories, inspections, correcting, servants for errors that barely mattered. His voice carried less weight now, not because he spoke more softly, but because people listened differently. Fear had changed. It was no longer sharp. It was tired. The slave family remained in the house, but they no longer felt like extensions of it. They were separate now, bound by necessity, not submission. Their grief had not healed. It had settled into something dense and permanent. He could feel it when they passed him in the halls, a pressure that did not bow. This unsettled him. Control had always depended on imbalance, on people needing him more than he needed them. Now the balance felt unstable, not reversed, just uncertain. Uncertainty breeds cruelty. It began quietly. Corrections became harsher. Expectations became impossible. He demanded precision from hands worn thin by years of labor. When mistakes happened, his anger arrived faster, stayed longer. He justified this to himself as discipline. The house required order. People became careless when not reminded of consequences. The child observed all of this. She was no longer a baby, no longer something he could ignore entirely. She moved through the house with deliberate quiet, learning where not to be, when not to speak. Her presence irritated him in a way he could not articulate. She reminded him of something unfinished. Sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he disliked. Not accusation, not fear, recognition, as if she understood. Something about him that he had not granted permission to know. Once he demanded to know why she stared. She lowered her eyes immediately and apologized. The apology did not satisfy him. Years passed. His body betrayed him further. Pain settled into his joints. His vision blurred in low light. He began leaning on furniture when he thought no one was watching. Authority required appearance. Weakness invited disrespect. He avoided mirrors more deliberately now. When he did catch his reflection, he felt irritation rather than surprise. The man staring back seemed smaller, less fixed. Time had eaten at him without permission. He resented this deeply. The house reflected this resentment. Rooms grew colder. Fires burned less often. Repairs were delayed. What once felt imposing now felt hollow. Guests stopped coming entirely. He told himself this was preference, not isolation. The child grew into a young woman. The change was gradual enough that he could pretend it was sudden. One season she was small and unremarkable. The next she occupied space differently. Her movements carried awareness. Her face held definition. People began noticing her in ways that made him uncomfortable. Comments were made, soft ones, careful ones, about beauty, about youth. He shut them down quickly. This was his house, his domain. Nothing within it existed independently of him. Yet something shifted when he looked at her now. Not desire at first. Comparison. Her youth highlighted his age with brutal clarity. Her vitality exposed his decline. Her presence sharpened his awareness of time slipping beyond correction. He began noticing her more often, not because he wanted to, but because she was impossible to ignore. She reminded him of her mother. This realization angered him. He told himself the resemblance was superficial. That memory exaggerated connections. That time distorted perception. But sometimes in certain angles of light, the similarity struck him with physical force. Her posture, her quiet endurance, the way she anticipated moods. These observations disturbed him. He responded by exerting more control. He dictated her movements, assigned her responsibilities under the guise of protection, limited her exposure to the outside world. He told himself he was preserving her, preserving order, preserving what remained of his authority. People noticed. Whispers returned to the edges of his life, subtle glances, pauses in conversation. He resented this intensely. He had built his existence on being untouchable, and now people looked at him as if he were fragile. Fragility was unacceptable. As his health worsened, fear began to take a new shape. Not fear of death, fear of irrelevance. He imagined the house after him, empty, sold, stripped of his presence. He imagined his name fading, his influence reduced to records and footnotes. The thought filled him with a quiet, corrosive panic. He began thinking in terms of permanence again. Legacy. The child was no longer a child. The thought arrived uninvited and unwelcome, yet it stayed. At first he rejected it outright. It felt improper even to acknowledge. He told himself it was a symptom of isolation, of age, of distorted thinking. But the more he tried to suppress it, the more persistent it became. He watched her more closely now. Not openly, not obviously. In reflections, in passing. He noted how she moved through rooms, how she responded to instruction, how her presence altered the atmosphere around her. People treated her differently, with softness, with attention. This angered him. Attention belonged to him. The house responded to this tension. Meals grew quieter. Servants moved carefully. The slave family watched their daughter with increasing anxiety. They sensed something forming but could not name it. Neither could he. What he felt was not love, not lust. It was possession sharpened by fear. One evening he overheard two servants speaking softly about her, not crudely, not boldly, simply acknowledging her existence as something separate from him. He reacted violently. Their punishment was disproportionate, their offense minor, his response excessive. The house felt the shift immediately. Fear returned sharper than before. That night he did not sleep. He sat in his chair, staring into darkness, replaying the incident in his mind. Not with regret, with justification. He told himself order required force. That unchecked behavior led to decay, that he had acted correctly. But beneath the justification, something else stirred. Awareness. He began understanding dimly that his control was no longer natural. It was forced. That frightened him more than disobedience ever had. The young woman avoided him more deliberately now. Her movements became careful, her silences longer. She sensed danger, even if she could not articulate it. Her parents noticed this too. They watched helplessly, bound by circumstances that offered no escape. The house felt tense, charged. He felt it in his chest, a constant pressure that refused to ease. His heart ached. His breath shortened. Doctors were summoned. They spoke carefully, respectfully. They suggested rest, moderation, acceptance. He dismissed them. Acceptance was surrender. As his strength waned, his need for control intensified. He began imagining arrangements, solutions that would stabilize his world. Ensure permanence. Silence whispers. Restore order. The idea returned again and again. Marriage, not companionship. Not affection, structure, legitimacy, control. He told himself it was practical, that it solved multiple problems at once, that it protected her, that it preserved his name, that it silenced doubt. He did not tell himself what it truly was, fear disguised as entitlement. The decision formed slowly, but once formed it felt inevitable. He convinced himself this was the natural course of things, that history supported him, that power justified him. He spoke to no one about it at first, but the house sensed the change. Silence deepened. Glances sharpened. The young woman felt the shift before anyone said a word. Her body reacted before her mind did. Unease settled into her bones. One evening he called her into the room. She stood before him, composed but tense. He studied her the way he once studied assets, evaluating, measuring, justifying. He spoke calmly, deliberately. He framed the decision as protection, as duty, as inevitability. He spoke of security, of stability, of honor. She listened. Her face revealed nothing. When he finished, the room felt heavier than before. She did not answer immediately. That pause frightened him more than refusal would have. Outside, the house seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence, something crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, not yet acted upon, but decided. The house did not react immediately to the decision. It absorbed it. That was how it had learned to survive. Nothing announced itself anymore. Nothing erupted. Changes arrived quietly, like cracks forming beneath layers of paint. By the time they were visible, the structure was already compromised. After that evening, the young woman avoided him with greater precision. Not openly, not disrespectfully. Her movements became strategic. She learned the timing of his routines, the places he lingered, the hours when his presence dominated certain rooms. She adjusted herself around him the way one learns to avoid pain without ever naming it. He noticed. Avoidance felt like resistance. Resistance demanded correction. He did not confront her immediately. He believed patience would reinforce authority. Let fear ferment. Let inevitability do the work for him. People always accepted what they were not allowed to escape. Her parents noticed the shift long before words were spoken. A tension settled into their home within the house. They whispered at night, voices low, eyes darting toward the door. Their daughter said little. She did not need to. Her body carried the knowledge now. Sleeplessness, loss of appetite, a constant alertness that never relaxed. They wanted to protect her. They could not. They had lived too long under the understanding that survival required submission. Rebellion did not save people like them. It only changed the manner of loss. The old man began positioning the world around his choice. He spoke to advisors, to clergy, to those whose approval could be purchased or pressured. He framed the situation carefully. Loneliness, age, responsibility, the need for order within his household. No one challenged him openly. Some hesitated. Some paused longer than necessary before agreeing. He noticed these moments and remembered them. Compliance was noted. Doubt was catalogued. Power requires memory. When the idea reached the servants, it arrived distorted. Whispers traveled faster than explanation. Fear sharpened. Glances toward the young woman grew heavy with pity. Some looked away entirely, unwilling to witness what they could not stop. She felt these looks. They confirmed what she already knew. When he finally spoke to her again, it was not framed as a request. It was delivered as instruction, softened by justification. He spoke of her future, as if it were an object he had already claimed. He spoke of safety, of elevation, of honor that would extend to her family. He did not ask what she wanted. Wanting was irrelevant. She listened in silence, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face remained controlled, but her breathing betrayed her, short, careful, as if even air had become something to ration. When he finished, he waited. Silence stretched. At last she spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady, almost detached. She said she needed time. The request angered him. Time suggested choice. Choice suggested power. He granted it anyway, believing delay would only deepen dependence. Fear grows more effective when it is prolonged. In the days that followed, he became more present. Not affectionate, not kind. Present in a way that invaded space without touching. He observed her closely, commented on her posture, her duties, her tone. Each remark carried weight. Each correction reinforced imbalance. She grew thinner. Sleep abandoned her almost entirely. At night she lay awake listening to the house, replaying conversations, anticipating footsteps. Sometimes she thought she heard her mother's voice in memory, not speaking words, only breathing beside her. That comfort lasted seconds before reality reclaimed her. Her parents watched her deteriorate. They said nothing. Silence had been trained into them over generations. It wrapped around their fear, suffocating action. They avoided their daughter's eyes, avoided acknowledging the truth forming between them. To speak it would make it real. The announcement came without ceremony. He gathered the household, spoke calmly, formally, declared the arrangement as settled, framed it as a solution to disorder, a stabilizing act. He watched faces as he spoke. Some masked reaction better than others. The young woman stood still. Her face showed no emotion. Inside, something had already broken. Preparation followed. Clothes were chosen, rooms rearranged. The house shifted again, adjusting around a new absence that had not yet occurred. Her parents were informed privately. Gratitude was expected, displayed. They thanked him. Their voices shook. He accepted this. Gratitude was the correct response. On the day of the ceremony, the house felt unnaturally quiet, as if sound itself resisted participation. Guests arrived out of obligation rather than celebration. Conversations stayed shallow. Eyes avoided lingering too long on the bride. She moved through the day as if detached from her body. Her hands trembled only when she was alone. When she was visible, she became still again. Stillness was safer than reaction. The vows were spoken. She repeated words without hearing them. He felt triumph. Not joy, not pride. Control. That night the house closed in around them. Doors shut. Candles burned low. The space between them felt dense, unmovable. She stood near the bed, rigid, while he settled himself with visible effort. What followed was not passion. It was assertion. He justified every moment internally. His right. His decision. His necessity. He ignored her silence because silence had always meant compliance in his world. Afterward, she lay motionless. He slept. Days turned into weeks. Marriage did not soften him. It sharpened him. His irritability increased. His expectations multiplied. Her presence became something he monitored constantly. He demanded availability, obedience, gratitude. She complied. Her body did what it was required to do. Her spirit withdrew further each day. She spoke less, ate less, became smaller in ways that frightened even those accustomed to fear. People noticed bruises, not always visible, not always physical. The house felt heavier. Eventually, sickness followed. Doctors were called. Explanations were offered. Stress, adjustment, fragility, no. One named the obvious. He blamed her weakness. When she told him she was with child, his reaction surprised even himself. Relief surged first, then satisfaction. Proof again, confirmation that his decision had been correct. That permanence was secured. Her face did not change. Pregnancy weakened her rapidly. Her body struggled. Her appetite vanished. She became pale, fragile. Her parents watched helplessly as life drained. From her slowly, not suddenly. He noticed. He dismissed concern. Strength was proven through endurance. The night labor began. The house returned to that familiar state of waiting. Servants moved quickly. Voices hushed. Fear thickened the air. He stood outside the room, listening. Her cries were softer than expected. That unsettled him. Hours passed. When the doctor emerged, his face told the truth before words did. The child lived. She did not. The house adjusted. Again, and this time, something inside him shifted in a way control could not correct. The house did not mourn her. It processed her. By morning, the sheets had been changed. The room aired out. The traces of blood and struggle erased with practiced efficiency. Servants moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, performing tasks the way people do when they know their actions are complicit but unavoidable. Death had become procedural here. The old man sat alone while it happened. No one asked him what he wanted done. They already knew. The body was removed without ceremony. No public grief, no display that might invite questions. The narrative was prepared before the sun fully. Rose, complications, fragile constitution, God's will. The words were old, reliable, worn smooth by repetition across generations. He repeated them when required. They sounded hollow even to him. When he finally entered the room where she had died, it was already altered. The bed remade. The smell different. Only one thing remained unchanged. The silence. Not the obedient silence he preferred. A thicker one. One that pressed inward instead of retreating. He stood there longer than he intended. He did not cry. He did not collapse. Instead, irritation surfaced first. At the inconvenience. At the timing. At the weakness of bodies that failed under pressure. He told himself he had anticipated this outcome. That risk was unavoidable. That men like him made decisions based on outcomes, not sentiment. The repetition did not settle him. The child was brought to him later that day. Another infant, small red breathing. Another proof. He looked at it and waited for the familiar sense of relief. It did not come. Instead, something tightened in his chest. The child's cries sounded different now. Not demanding, accusatory. Each breath felt like an intrusion. He ordered the wet nurse summoned. Distance was necessary again. The slave family did not enter the room. They were not permitted to see their daughter's body. The explanation was delivered gently, efficiently. Religious propriety. Household order. They nodded. They thanked him. Their gratitude sounded broken, as if the words themselves were struggling to remain intact. Grief hollowed them out. They aged overnight. The mother stopped speaking almost entirely. The father's back bent further. They moved through their duties like shadows tethered to obligation. No anger, no rebellion. Just absence layered on top of absence. He noticed this. It unsettled him more than protest would have. Days passed. The funeral was private, controlled, attendance limited. He stood at the front, composed, dignified. People offered condolences, some sincere, some cautious. No one spoke her name too loudly. No one lingered on details. Eyes followed him, not with admiration, with evaluation. This irritated him deeply. He returned home to a house that felt different now. Not rearranged, exposed, as if something essential had been stripped away and the remaining structure was pretending nothing had changed. At night, sleep abandoned him completely. He lay awake, listening to sounds he had trained himself to ignore. The cry of the infant, the soft movements of servants, the wind pressing against old walls. Every sound carried weight now, as if the house itself were reminding him of something he refused to name. Images returned uninvited. Her face during labor, the way her voice weakened, the moment her eyes stopped focusing. He told himself these were natural thoughts, temporary, grief, misidentified as irritation. But the images persisted. They did not fade with repetition. They sharpened. He began avoiding the child, not intentionally, reflexively. The sight of it unsettled him. Its existence felt like accusation rather than continuation. He justified the distance by reminding himself that children were raised by others, that his role was structural, not emotional. Yet the child's cries followed him through the house. Servants whispered now, less carefully than before. Fear still existed, but it had changed texture. It was mixed with something else: judgment, disbelief, pity. These were emotions he had never tolerated. He corrected them when he could. Punishment returned. It did not bring relief. His health deteriorated rapidly. Pain became constant. His hands shook uncontrollably at times. Doctors were summoned more frequently. Their recommendations grew softer. Acceptance crept into their language. He rejected it. Acceptance meant acknowledging limits. Limits meant confronting consequences. The house began reflecting his decline. Fires burned low. Meals went untouched. Rooms fell into disuse. He stopped inspecting, stopped correcting. Authority decayed quietly when no longer enforced. One evening, as dusk settled into the corridors, he heard a sound that froze him in place. Laughter. Soft, brief, uncertain. It came from the child's room. The sound filled him with immediate anger. How could anything joyful exist here now? How dare life continue without permission? He moved toward the room without thinking, his steps uneven, breath shallow. He stood in the doorway and watched. The wet nurse held the child gently. The child reached toward her face with clumsy hands. The scene was ordinary, tender, human. It repulsed him. He realized then that the child no longer represented legacy. It represented her. Not her body, her cost, the thing taken from her that could not be returned. The realization struck deeper than he expected. He retreated without a word. That night something cracked. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. He whispered her name for the first time since her death. The sound startled him. It felt forbidden. Memory flooded in after that. Not images alone, sensations, her weight beside him, her hesitation, the fear she never voiced. He saw the pattern clearly now, laid bare without justification to shield it. He had not been misunderstood. He had been exact. For the first time, regret arrived without disguise. It did not soften him. It destroyed something structural inside him. Days became unbearable. He avoided people, avoided light, sat alone in rooms that felt too large. The house no longer obeyed him. It judged him. Every corridor reminded him of what he had consumed and discarded. The slave family avoided him entirely now. Their obedience was mechanical, empty. Their eyes no longer sought his approval or feared his disapproval. He had become irrelevant to their grief. This terrified him. Irrelevance felt worse than hatred. He attempted to assert control again, issued orders, demanded attention. His voice lacked force. His presence no longer commanded silence. One night, unable to sleep, he wandered into the back of the house. The corridor he had avoided for years, the one that led past rooms that no longer existed in function. He stopped outside her old room. The door was locked. He stared at it for a long time, hand hovering inches from the handle. His heart pounded painfully. His breath came shallow. For a moment he considered turning back. Then he unlocked it. The room was empty. No traces, no possessions, no warmth, just a hollow space where something vital had once existed. He sat on the floor, not out of weakness, out of collapse. For the first time in his life, authority abandoned him completely, and in that emptiness, he understood something with brutal clarity. He would live, and living would be the punishment. Living did not end him. It dismantled him piece by piece. Days no longer arrived with meaning. Morning light entered the room like an unwanted witness, exposing a body that refused to recover and a mind that refused to forget. He woke each day already exhausted, as if sleep itself had become another burden rather than relief. The house had stopped responding to him. Not in rebellion. In indifference. Servants moved without waiting for his signal. Decisions happened quietly, efficiently, without his involvement. Doors opened and closed without his permission. Meals were prepared whether he ate or not. His presence no longer bent the atmosphere of the house. Power had not been stolen. It had expired. His body betrayed him relentlessly. His hands shook even when resting. Pain settled deep into his joints and never fully left. Some mornings he could not straighten his fingers. Other days his legs refused to carry him without assistance. Pride fought reality for a while, but pride weakened faster. Eventually he allowed help. The first time a servant helped him dress, he felt something rupture inside his chest. Not humiliation. Something worse, finality, the understanding that authority, once surrendered, never returns. Doctors came often now. Their visits grew shorter. Their words grew softer. They no longer discussed recovery. They discussed comfort, management, time. He hated the way they spoke to him, like a problem already solved. At night his mind turned against him. Sleep no longer protected him. When it came, it dragged him backward. Dreams replayed moments he had once dismissed as insignificant, not the obvious cruelty. The subtle ones, the casual commands, the silence he had demanded, the way fear had shaped her posture long before it ever shaped her fate. He woke shaking, breath shallow, heart racing. No one came. No one needed to. The child grew. He tried to avoid seeing her, but avoidance required effort he no longer had. She moved through the house with quiet precision, already learning how to exist without drawing attention. The resemblance struck him harder now. Not physical alone, behavioral. The way she sensed tension. The way she paused before speaking. The way she absorbed moods without being taught. It terrified him. He realized then that fear had not died with her mother. It had been inherited. When the child looked at him, there was no warmth, no curiosity, no resentment, just distance. A distance that could never be closed. He had wanted legacy. This was it. The slave family continued to deteriorate in silence. The mother's voice faded until it was barely more than breath. Her hands shook constantly. The father moved like a man already halfway gone. They did not look at him anymore. Not out of defiance. Out of irrelevance. This hurt more than hatred ever could. He had always believed himself central to their suffering. Now he realized he was no longer even that. The house felt enormous. Rooms stretched endlessly, filled with objects that no longer belonged to anyone. He stopped entering many of them. Walking exhausted him. Stairs became impossible. Entire wings of the house fell into disuse, left to dust and shadow. He spent most days seated near a window, watching time pass without participating in it. Reflection became unavoidable. There were no distractions left. No authority to enforce, no audience to perform for. Just memory, repeating itself with cruel precision. He saw the pattern clearly now. Loneliness had not justified his actions. Age had not excused them. Power had not forced his hand. He had chosen. That realization arrived too late to change anything. Regret settled into him like a second spine. Constant, unyielding, it did not soften him. It did not cleanse him. It simply existed, heavy and permanent. He tried prayer. At first, the words felt foreign. He spoke them anyway, awkwardly, addressing a silence that did not answer. He asked for forgiveness without believing it possible. He asked for peace without believing he deserved it. Nothing responded. Peace never came. One afternoon, he heard laughter again. It came from the courtyard this time. The child's voice, light, unburdened. For a moment, it almost sounded joyful. The sound cut through him with surgical precision. For the first time, he did not feel anger. He felt exclusion. Her life was unfolding without reference to him. His regret would not shape her future. His suffering would not protect her. His awareness meant nothing beyond his own mind. This broke something fundamental. He had always believed suffering balanced wrongdoing. That understanding was punishment. But this punishment was invisible. No one would learn from it. No one would be warned. He would carry it alone. As years dragged on, his body shrank further. He bent inward, as if physically retreating from the world. His voice weakened. His presence faded. People spoke around him now rather than to him. He began speaking aloud to empty rooms without noticing. Half sentences, names whispered without intention. Sometimes he addressed her directly, apologizing in fragments, explanations spilling out far too late to matter. No one answered. One evening, He overheard the child ask about her mother. The question was simple, honest. A servant answered gently, carefully, without cruelty but without lies. He sat frozen as the truth passed between them. Without him, uncontrolled, unshaped, the child absorbed it quietly and returned to her tasks. That was when he understood fully. He had lost even the right to explain. That night he wept, not quietly, not briefly. He wept with the kind of grief that offers no relief. His body convulsed, breath breaking, chest aching as if it might give way entirely. The sound echoed through empty rooms. No one came. In the days that followed, he began imagining the house after his death. The way rooms would feel lighter, the way servants would breathe more freely, the way fear might finally dissipate from the walls. This thought brought him a strange calm. He did not deserve remembrance. He deserved disappearance. One morning, pain tore through his chest as he tried to rise from bed. He collapsed back onto the mattress, breath shallow, vision narrowing. For a moment, he believed the end had arrived. He welcomed it. But death hesitated. It always did, leaving him alive, broken, aware, left with nothing but time and the unbearable clarity that understanding, when it comes too late, is not redemption. It is sentence. The body refused to release him. That became the final cruelty. Each morning he woke expecting something different. Just stillness deeper than sleep. A silence that did not breathe back. Instead, there was always pain first. Then awareness. Then the slow humiliation of realizing he was still, required to endure another day inside. A body that no longer served him. The house had begun to smell like age. Not decay, age, old wood, cold stone, air that had been trapped too long inside walls that had outlived their purpose. Once this smell had meant permanence to him. Now it meant waiting. Waiting without destination. Servants no longer hid their routines from him. They spoke freely when they thought he could not hear, then stopped correcting themselves when they realized it did not matter. Their fear had thinned into obligation. Obligation, when prolonged, becomes indifference. Indifference hollowed him. He spent hours sitting in the same chair, staring at nothing in particular. Time stretched unnaturally. He could feel minutes pass through his body, like pressure rather than movement. His thoughts circled the same ground again and again, unable to escape. Memory no longer arrived as fragments. It arrived whole. He remembered the first night she slept in his house as a child. The way she had curled inward instinctively, already learning how to occupy as little space as possible. He remembered how he had noticed this, and felt satisfaction rather than concern. He remembered how silence had always pleased him. Now silence punished him. At night, the house spoke in ways it never had before. Not voices, sounds, wood contracting, wind pushing against windows, distant footsteps that stopped before reaching him. Each sound felt deliberate, as if the house were reminding him that it had witnessed everything. He tried to move rooms, thinking distance might soften the pressure. It did not. Wherever he went, memory followed. The walls did not forget even when people tried to. His body weakened further. Eating became difficult. Food lost texture, then taste. Swallowing hurt. Sometimes he forgot to eat entirely, then felt faint hours later without understanding why. Servants began monitoring him like a fragile object rather than a master. This infuriated him, but anger required energy he no longer had. The child grew older still. He saw her less often now, but when he did, the change was undeniable. Her body lengthened. Her voice settled. She moved with cautious confidence, already learning how to survive spaces shaped by control. He watched her from a distance one afternoon and felt something twist painfully inside him. She had her mother's eyes. Not the color, the expression, the quiet alertness, the instinct to assess danger before it announced itself, the ability to disappear emotionally while remaining physically present. That inheritance felt heavier than blood. He had passed fear down like property. That realization stayed with him. One evening, he attempted to speak to her. The decision formed suddenly, impulsively. He told himself he would explain, clarify, that words might lighten the weight that had been crushing him for years. That confession might grant relief, even if forgiveness did not. He called her name. She stopped where she was, turned slowly, and waited. That waiting undid him. Not respect, Not obedience, distance, polite, careful distance. The kind reserved for strangers. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Words failed him completely. The explanations he had rehearsed collapsed under the weight of her presence. Everything he might say sounded hollow before it could form. She waited a moment longer, then lowered her eyes and left. He did not call after her. That was when he understood that speech was no longer available to him as redemption. Some things once broken cannot be addressed directly. After that, his decline accelerated. He began forgetting small things, names, orders, familiar, routes through the house. Sometimes he lost track of where he was entirely, standing frozen in corridors until a servant guided him back. This terrified him more than physical pain. Pain could be endured. Confusion stripped him of the last illusion of control. Doctors were called again. They spoke more openly now. There was nothing to be done. The body was failing. The mind would follow. Time was limited but unpredictable. Unpredictability felt cruel. He wanted certainty, a date, a schedule. Even death, he believed, should be orderly. Instead, he was given waiting. The slave family no longer tried to hide their grief. The mother began whispering to herself constantly, prayers or memories or both. The father's hands shook so badly, he could no longer work efficiently. Younger servants took over his duties without instruction. No one asked permission. This house was already preparing for a world without him. He sensed it in subtle ways. Objects moved. Rooms repurposed. Conversations shifted. His presence was no longer central to anything except his own suffering. One night pain woke him, abruptly, sharp, crushing. It radiated through his chest and into his arm. His breath came in short, desperate bursts. For a moment, panic surged. Then relief followed. This is it, he thought. He closed his eyes and waited. The pain receded. Not fully. Enough to leave him alive. He laughed weakly into the darkness, the sound breaking into something close to sobbing. Even death, it seemed, refused to complete the task. After that night, something inside him surrendered. Not regret. Expectation. He stopped anticipating an ending. Stopped imagining release. Each day became something to endure rather than count. Time lost meaning. Only sensation remained. The house grew quieter still. One afternoon, rain fell heavily, pounding against the roof with relentless force. He sat listening to it, feeling strangely calm. Rain had always felt cleansing to others. To him it sounded like erasure attempting to work slowly. He thought about legacy, not in terms of name or property, in terms of impact. What remained after him would not be his buildings or wealth. It would be habits, fear, silence passed down unconsciously, lives shaped by avoidance rather than choice. This understanding settled heavily. It did not make him kinder. It made him honest. Honesty, he realized, was the final punishment, because honesty arrived only when action was no longer possible. As evening approached, he asked to be moved closer to the back of the house, the corridor he had avoided for years. The place where rooms held memories he had never allowed himself to confront fully. Servants hesitated, then complied. They positioned his chair near the closed door of her old room. The door remained locked, untouched since the night he had sat on its floor and collapsed, under the weight of understanding. He stared at it for hours, not hoping, remembering. He whispered apologies again, not expecting forgiveness. Just releasing sound into space that had held her presence once. His voice trembled. His words broke apart. The door did not open. The house did not respond. And for the first time he did not resent that, because some silences are not meant to be filled. They are meant to be carried, and he would carry this one until the body finally stopped refusing him mercy. By the time winter returned for the third time since her death, he no longer marked time the way other people did. Days had stopped feeling separate from one another. Morning did not feel like a beginning. Night did not feel like an ending. Life had collapsed into one continuous stretch of endurance. He woke each day already tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that lived inside the bones. His body protested movement before he even attempted it. Joints stiffened painfully. His back ached, as if something heavy pressed against it constantly. Even when he lay still. Once pain had been an inconvenience. Now it was structure. The house felt different in winter now. Fireplaces burned longer than before. Servants kept the rooms warm, attentive to every draught. Thick curtains were drawn, rugs layered upon stone floors. Yet the warmth never reached him fully. Cold had learned the shape of his body. It lingered inside his chest, his hands, his breath. He spent most of his days seated near the same window. Wrapped in blankets he no longer noticed. Outside, the courtyard changed slowly. Leaves fell. Snow covered the ground. Footprints appeared and disappeared. The world continued. That realization used to anger him. Now it only drained him. Once this house had responded to his presence. Doors closed more quietly when he approached. Voices lowered. Movements adjusted around his moods. Fear had been efficient. Fear had been dependable. Now the house barely reacted. Servants still respected him, but respect had thinned into routine. Their attention felt procedural, not emotional. They no longer studied his expressions carefully. They no longer waited for cues before acting. He was no longer unpredictable. He was predictable. That knowledge stung in ways he had never anticipated. He tried to assert himself once, raising his voice over a minor oversight. The sound that emerged shocked him, thin, unsteady, almost pleading. The servant apologized calmly and corrected the mistake without fear. No hesitation, no tension. The moment lingered in the air longer than his voice had. That night, sleep refused to come. He lay awake listening to the house breathe. Wood creaked. Wind pressed against windows. Somewhere far off, a door closed softly. Sounds carried further at night, stretching into places they did not belong. His mind refused to rest. Memories returned without sequence or warning. Not as stories, but as sensations. The way silence used to fall when he entered a room. The way people adjusted themselves unconsciously around him. And her. He remembered how she learned stillness early. How she learned to anticipate his moods before she learned to understand them. How obedience became instinct, long before it became conscious choice. He had mistaken that for devotion. The clarity of that realization burned. At times he thought he heard movement where there was none. Footsteps that stopped just before reaching him. Fabric brushing against door frames. The sound of breathing not his own. He knew it was memory. That did not make it easier. Once, in the early hours before dawn, he spoke her name aloud. The sound startled him. It echoed weakly and vanished. No response followed. Silence reclaimed the space immediately, as if embarrassed by the intrusion. He felt smaller after that. His body continued to fail him in slow, humiliating ways. His hands trembled unpredictably. Objects slipped from his grasp. Writing became difficult, then impossible. His voice weakened further, trailing off mid-sentence more often than not. Words formed clearly in his mind, but refused to travel outward. Language abandoned him piece by piece. Servants began anticipating his needs, without waiting for instruction. Water appeared before he asked. Pillows were adjusted while he slept. Blankets tucked in around his shoulders. Their care was gentle. He hated it. Gentleness implied pity. Pity implied irrelevance. Once he had inspired fear without effort. Now he inspired concern. That shift destroyed something essential inside him. The child grew into adolescence while he withered. He saw this only in fragments. A reflection in a mirror as she passed. A voice deeper, steadier, calling to someone else. A presence that avoided him naturally, without instruction or resentment. Distance had become instinct. He realized then that she would never confront him. Never accuse him. Never demand explanations. Never grant him the dignity of being hated. He would not even be remembered as a villain. He would be forgotten as a fact. That understanding hollowed him more than rage ever could. He had always believed punishment should be visible. That wrongdoing deserved consequence others could witness. That guilt should come with spectacle. Instead, his punishment was private, invisible, meaningless to everyone except himself. This enraged him briefly. Then rage exhausted him. Even anger required energy now, and he had little left to give. His thoughts turned increasingly toward death, not with fear but with irritation. Death had become another thing that refused him. It hovered just beyond reach, never close enough to finish what time had started. He imagined the house after him in vivid detail. Servants speaking freely, doors left open. The weight lifted. Perhaps the slave family leaving at last, carrying their grief somewhere else, somewhere it could breathe. He imagined the child grown, living a life untouched by his name. That image brought no peace. It brought finality. One afternoon, without fully understanding why, he asked to see her. The request unsettled everyone. Servants hesitated. Glances were exchanged. Silence stretched. Then word was sent quietly. When she entered the room, time seemed to slow unnaturally. She stood at a respectful distance, posture careful, controlled. She did not approach unless invited. He gestured weakly for her to sit. She did. Up close, the resemblance to her mother struck him with unexpected force. Not beauty, not softness. Restraint. The way emotion was held back deliberately. The way eyes revealed nothing unless permitted. He tried to speak. Words emerged slowly, unevenly. He spoke of protection, of responsibility, of circumstances, of belief. He said he had done what he thought was necessary. As he spoke, he could hear the hollowness of it himself. She listened without interrupting. Her expression did not change. When he finished, silence settled between them, heavy and unmoving. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, free of accusation. She said she understood that he believed what he said. She said she had learned long ago that understanding did not mean agreement. Then she stood. She did not forgive him. She did not condemn him. She simply left. That moment broke something final inside him. In the days that followed, his decline accelerated. Appetite vanished completely. Sleep became fragmented, shallow. He drifted in and out of consciousness without control. Sometimes he dreamed he was young again, walking through the house with authority, commanding silence. Other times he dreamed he was invisible, shouting orders no one heard. Dreams bled into waking life. Reality loosened its grip. One night, as wind battered the house relentlessly, he found himself speaking aloud again. Apologies poured out fractured and incoherent, not directed at anyone in particular. No one answered. The house absorbed his words the way it had absorbed everything else. By dawn, clarity settled with crushing weight. This was not waiting for death. This was living long enough to understand exactly what he had done, and knowing that understanding would not end. The morning did not announce itself as the last one. It arrived the same way every other morning had for months. Quietly, without urgency, without ceremony, light filtered through the curtains and settled on the walls as if nothing important was about to happen. The house did not prepare. The world did not pause. Only his body understood what was coming. He woke late, later than usual, confused for a moment by the position of the sun. His chest felt heavier than it had the night before. Not painful, not sharp, just dense, as though something invisible had settled inside him and refused to move. Breathing required focus now. Each inhale demanded effort, and each exhale felt delayed, uncertain, as if his body had forgotten the rhythm it had followed all its life. Servants noticed immediately. They always did now. They moved closer, spoke less, watched more. Their faces carried a look he had seen countless times before in others, but had never recognized when it mattered. It was not fear. It was not concern. It was readiness. The quiet efficiency of people who know the end is near and see no reason to pretend otherwise. They helped him sit near the window again. This had become routine, the last place his body tolerated for long. Outside, the courtyard lay stripped bare by winter. The trees stood exposed, branches thin and unmoving. The ground looked pale and tired, as if even it had grown weary of holding things up. He watched without thinking at first. Thought had become exhausting. Concentration slipped easily now, drifting away before it could take shape. But images still came, unwanted, unfiltered, clearer than they had ever been. He remembered the house when it was loud, when footsteps echoed with purpose, when voices filled rooms without caution, when he mattered in ways people could not ignore. That version of the house felt unreal now, like a place he had visited rather than lived in. Power had been the air he breathed then. It had shaped the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way others responded. He had never questioned it, because it had never resisted him, until the end. His breathing grew shallower as the morning stretched on. Servants adjusted pillows, offered water, but he drank little. Swallowing felt like unnecessary labor. His body had begun choosing what it would and would not accept. He noticed something strange then. The pain that had lived with him for so long was fading, not because he was healing, but because sensation itself was withdrawing. The ache in his joints softened. The pressure in his chest dulled. In its place came numbness, spreading slowly, deliberately, as if his body were disconnecting itself piece by piece. He could no longer feel his feet. Then his legs followed. His hands remained last, resting uselessly on the blanket, fingers curled inward slightly, holding nothing. As his body receded, his mind sharpened. This was the cruelty of it. Clarity arrived only when it was no longer useful. He thought of the moment everything truly began, long before sickness, long before regret, long before death. Not the wedding, not the child, not even her suffering. He thought of the choice. The moment he decided he could. The calm certainty with which he understood that no one would stop him. That authority would excuse desire. That ownership could be mistaken for consent if spoken confidently enough. That was the moment his life ended. Everything afterward had merely taken time to catch up. He saw now how carefully fear had been constructed in that house, how silence had been taught, how obedience had been rewarded just enough to feel voluntary. He had not needed to be cruel constantly. Cruelty had become automatic, embedded in structure, invisible because it was normalized. He had called it order. He had called it responsibility. He had called it necessity. Now none of those words remained. Only consequence. Footsteps approached slowly. He knew who it was before she entered. He felt the shift in the room, the way space reorganized itself around her presence. She stood in the doorway for a moment, observing him not as a master, not even as a man, but as something already leaving. She approached without hesitation. There was no fear in her movements now, no caution, just distance. She spoke his name once. He tried to answer. His mouth opened, but his chest tightened sharply. Only air escaped, thin and useless. She did not repeat herself. She moved closer, so he could see her clearly. Her face carried no anger, no tenderness, just calm. The calm of someone who had already survived what was necessary and no longer needed anything from him. She told him she had been informed, that the servants believed it would not be long now. He wanted to apologize properly, not the broken apologies whispered into the dark, not the ones meant to relieve himself rather than heal anything. Something complete, something that acknowledged the full weight of what he had done. His lips moved. No sound followed. The effort drained what little strength remained. She waited without impatience. After a moment, she spoke again. She said she hoped he found peace, not forgiveness. Peace. The word settled heavily inside him. Peace was something he had taken freely from others, something he had denied without hesitation, something he had never earned. She did not stay. There was nothing left to say. When she left the room, finality entered with her absence. The light outside dimmed further. Shadows lengthened across the walls, stretching toward him slowly, deliberately. Breathing became irregular. Long pauses formed between breaths, each one uncertain if another would follow. His body no longer remembered rhythm. Muscles released their hold gradually, surrendering control without resistance. Fear arrived then, not fear of dying. Fear of understanding too late. Memories replayed relentlessly now, stripped of justification, stripped of explanation. No authority softened them. No logic defended them. Only impact remained, the way lives had bent around his will, the way silence had been enforced, the way choice had been removed and renamed. This was the punishment, not loneliness, not loss, understanding. His final breath did not announce itself. It slipped out quietly, unnoticed. No words followed, no final declaration, no acknowledgement. The house did not respond. Later, servants moved with practiced efficiency. The body was prepared. The room was cleaned. Windows were opened. Air replaced what had been held too long. The house adjusted easily. It always had. By evening, his presence had already thinned into memory. By morning, routine resumed. The world did not pause. The courtyard remained still. Years later, the house would change hands. Names would fade. Stories would blur into rumor. History would compress into something easier to swallow, but the consequence would remain intact. He lived long enough to understand exactly what he had done. And that understanding stayed with him until the end. If this story held you through its silence, subscribe. These are not stories meant to comfort. They are stories meant to follow you long after they are finished.